Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's Ironside Take30 with a data advisor. My name is Jeff Spear. I'll be walking you through data wrangling and enrichment for analytics today. We're going to talk a little bit about Ironside, why data enrichment is important. Then we're going to talk about data preparation in order to make data wrangling easier, and then some details of what data wrangling looks like and how you do it, and how it's important to think about bimodal architecture when you're doing data wrangling. This is a follow-on to Tuesday's session from the Take30 with a data scientist. So if you were on that session, awesome, and you may hear some stuff that we talked about there. Not a lot, but there's a little bit of overlap. And if you weren't, this certainly does stand on its own, but there was some great stuff in that session as well. We're going to take Q&A at the end. We can do it through the questions window, or we'll unmute if you want to ask your questions audibly. All right, so let's get started. So like I said, this is the fourth in our data advisor sessions. We've got 2 more coming up in the following 2 weeks, so we encourage you to stay on board. And here at Ironside, we help our clients use data to make better decisions about their business. That's what we've been doing for quite a long time, and we do that in a number of different ways. We have everything from strategic advisory capabilities. We do a lot of work doing data modeling, UX design, and then a lot of building and deploying data warehouses, ETL, visual analytics. That's the area we're talking about today more. We're going to talk a little bit, I guess, about governance, master data management, but we also do managed services to help you keep your systems running. So if you have any questions or needs in any of those areas, we invite you to reach out to us. We work with a lot of different partners. So we're going to be talking a bit about Precisely today, because they have a lot of third-party data offerings that can help with data enrichment and also with some of the processing. This is related to data wrangling, so that could be Alteryx, Trifacta, which we talked about last week on this series, and then also things like Snowflake and AWS as places to store this data and where it sort of sits after you've wrangled it. I'm the practice lead for information management. I've been doing database and ETL and that kind of stuff for 20 plus years. We've also got Dipankar on my team on the phone. He's on the webcam. He's a senior consultant. He's got a lot of experience in MDM and data warehousing. And then also with us is Niravalia, who's an engagement leader on my team, and he's here to answer any Snowflake or other related questions. Why do we want to look to external data sources? Why is third-party data important? The short version is that the more information you have, the better your analytics are going to be. Pam talked yesterday about how more information makes predictive modeling more accurate, which is very true. But it's the same for other types of analytics. You want to do aggregation or roll-ups or segmentation, or basically have more information, the ability to drill into more detail. Extra information provides that detail. You have some of that stuff in your source systems and internal data, but that usually only goes so far. You can really expand your view into your data, whether it's your customers or your products or world events, by pulling in third-party data. And the other thing is that there's just more and more of it available. We're in a data-driven economy, and there's lots of places and lots of providers that are dedicated to giving, sort of accurate, frequently updated sets of data that you can use to augment your own data. What's important when you're doing that is often to prepare that data. When you get data from a third party, you have to connect it to the data that you have to make it useful, and that requires some sort of key. Some sort of common attribute that says, okay, well, this address or this person or this company is tied to this set of third-party data, these attributes. We're going to be using geospatial and location-based data as the example today, but this is going to be true regardless of what kind of data that you're looking to include. With geospatial data, it is especially important to do so. You want to do some pre-processing to make the lookups easy to do. You want to convert the data to have a common key. You want to make sure the third-party data has that key and that your data has that key. With Precisely data that we talked about yesterday and we'll be talking a little bit more about in a minute, there is a standard key that they have that is location-based. And so all the data sets that you acquire from them will have that key. And then the question is just to get your data into that key. And that may require some address standardization. So putting your addresses in a common format so it's easy to connect them to other data. And it may involve geocoding, which is taking an address or other location information and turning that into a latitude, longitude, this sort of specific actual geospatial location. So when you do that, that means when your data wranglers come in, they don't have to worry about doing all that work. They can just join the data together or take data that's already been joined and do their wrangling. It lets them focus on producing business insight and producing business value. This kind of pre-processing is important. You can do it locally, you can do it remote.
Precisely
has a tool called
Precisely ID,
which does a variety of things, but one of the things that you can do geocoding locally. So, you know, if you want to do all that stuff on site, that is one option. But you can also do it through APIs. So if you want to do it only when you need it, or just not have, you know, on-premise footprint, you have APIs as an option. So our poll today is how accessible is third-party data in your organization? So Debbie's going to put up the poll, and we're just going to take a minute to see what people think. And so, yeah, so what we find is people, you know, it's one thing to have data, it's something else to have it accessible. So it's often the case that, you know, people will have stuff and it's sort of sitting off in a silo and it's very hard to get to. And so people would like to use it, but they can't. Obviously, the ideal situation is the information that you're looking for, especially this, you know, rich third-party set of attributes, is available to everyone who wants it.
So Jeff, this is the results that we obtained. So for 50-50.
That's all right. Well, so that's not too bad, but you know, it's always room for improvement. I want to talk about what this data can look like. And again, this is an example that we're using. It's a common, you know, people commonly like this kind of data, but there's other types of data available. So, you know, if we're thinking about, you know, you might have customer data or contact data or business data, and you take that, and from that you can add things like demographics about people. You know, what you may know their address, but you don't know what kind of neighborhood they live in, or you know, what their income is, or other details about, you know, about them. There's also demographics about businesses, and there can be, if you're focused more on location data, there can be a lot of information about property. So for example, in insurance, there's a lot of information about, you know, buildings that can be very relevant for insurance ratings, as well as things like, you know, sort of location on floodplains and that sort of stuff, fire hazards, that kind of thing. So all that data is out there and can be linked to the data at the bottom. You might have marketing lists, you have some location data of your own, you have historical sales value, and this lets you tie that all together. And as you go into more detail, you can have access to things like, you know, level of education, mortgage information on a home, you know, income, disposable income for a household. You can have some sort of predefined segmentation. So if you're looking for different, you know, looking for customers that have a certain lifestyle or a certain socioeconomic category, a lot of that stuff, you know, is pre-existing and can easily be tied to information that you have in your systems. So, and obviously, you know, with thousands and thousands of attributes out there, you don't want to bring it all in and then sort of have to hunt through it all. The key is to find what provides business value and, you know, focus on those data sets and bring those in so people can really get a return very quickly. So this is a sample enrichment process, and Dipankar is going to talk about this, how one might do on-premise preparation of data.
All right, thank you, Jeff. My name is Dipankar Dasgupta, and I would talk about how you bring or connect the client's data with a third-party data set to enrich your data. So you saw from the previous slides, there were hundreds of attributes that you can enrich the customer data set with. In fact, there are over 1,100 attributes that is connected to that unique identifier that Jeff mentioned. But the customer data doesn't have that unique identifier. All it has is kind of address data and maybe customer information and some related to their business purposes. So, but before I go into more details about this specific use case and the example that I'm talking about, I want to give a little bit of background. So yesterday, Pam and Tim from our data science team spoke about the specific example where they used this third-party data sets to give their model a 25% or more lift. And that's just what the third-party data does. So in today's call, I would tell you or give you more details about how you get the client and join it to that unique key that opens up a whole new world. And it's kind of enriches your client's data with the other data sets that you have readily available now. So in this particular example, like this was an example where we have the digging or an excavation where somebody calls and it creates an incident, but whether the excavation company is going to send a highly skilled technician or a supervisor, which can cost a lot at times, or whether they should send, because it's a low risk, and they should send a junior level mechanic. So to reduce their cost, that's where this kind of information helps. And this geo-enrichment and the location intelligence data sets are what enriches the data. So customer have a lot of data with addresses and their names, but the address data is most of the times, as you have seen, it's messy, it's not in a standard format, and you have to do some data quality routines on that to standardize, cleanse, and format the data into a specific format. And data
precisely
has a lot of these data quality routines that are readily available in the Spectrum tool that we have used in this particular use case. And once for this particular use case, we had longitude and latitude data, and we used the reverse geocoding module to retrieve the standardized address information from the set of longitude and latitude. And once we get that cleansed and standardized data, we could look up on their master data set and retrieve that unique key or the unique identifier that we have been talking about. And this unique identifier gives you the connection to those other data sets, and it gives you information regarding your property attributes, your population density, and boundaries, risk data, like traffic patterns and other geodemographic and sociodemographic information. So with this, like yesterday, Pam talked about how the data was enriched, and today I spoke about how you have the client's data and connect it with this unique identifier to connect to those other data sets that you can enrich your models with. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jeff.
So to turn this back to data wrangling, this is the model slide that Dean talked about last week when he was introducing data wrangling. And this illustrates that data wrangling doesn't replace existing ETL and data warehouses. It runs in parallel. And so, at the top, you're still doing enterprise ETL that populates, your data warehouse with facts and dimensions. But at the same time, you're going to use your data wrangling tools to go to source systems and possibly to an ODS or other sort of prepared data sources, and then use that to create more self-serve dynamic analytics. And you only want to do both of these things in order to have sort of a successful architecture, which we're going to talk about more in just a sec. So you're doing both of these things, and if you're doing data wrangling, this in a nutshell is what it's going to look like. You're going to pull data from flat files, from a data warehouse, maybe from APIs. You're going to run them through a tool like Trifacta. You're going to put them in a sandbox like Snowflake, somewhere where you're allowed to store output data, and then you're going to create, dashboards or other analytics with it. And these are more sort of, ad hoc or new questions or one-offs or, highly time-sensitive questions, to provide business value. So if you, if you're trying to bring in third-party data and you haven't done any preparation, this is going to get a lot more complicated. If you have to do, the address standardization and the geocoding and the reverse lookup and linking to the third-party key in the wrangling tool, this diagram gets very complicated. If you pre-process and have that stuff sort of ready to go, then it becomes very simple because your pre-processed data can sit in your data warehouse or other source. The third-party data might also already be on site, or it might be through an API. But from a data wrangler's perspective, it's just other data sources and they pull them in like everything else. And this really lets them focus on achieving, quick results, high value, and really getting the job done that they should be doing most of the time. So, and that's really the point of wrangling, is that it lets you manage that kind of analytics. But what's important is to think about the cycle of those analytics. If Dean last week talked about the fact that pretty much everyone does data wrangling, but it's often in a tool like Excel. And what often happens in Excel is someone becomes aware of a new data source and looks into it and creates a spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet has value. And then a few months later, that spreadsheet has become 5 spreadsheets. And then a year later, it's become 20 spreadsheets. And it's somebody's job, 2 weeks out of the month to refresh those spreadsheets. So what's happened is you've recognized insight, but you haven't really sort of codified it. You haven't really made it something that is easy to deliver to the enterprise. So what's important is that when you find an insight that has lasting value, that you migrate it to your data warehouse and you automate that process and streamline it so that it's easier to do and so that it's available to more people. And so, data wrangling sits over here and helps identify those insights. But what you want to do is, once they've found something valuable, move it over so that they can find the next insight. And so that sort of bimodal architecture is what data wrangling enables. With a tool like Trifacta, when someone says, okay, here's an insight, the people who need to put it in the warehouse can look at the Trifacta recipe and say, oh, okay, here are the steps you take. And that's basically my instruction manual for writing the ETL code to put it in the warehouse. So it makes that much simpler than looking through a spreadsheet, which is often very hard to decipher and understand, and there's manual steps, and it becomes very confusing. So to summarize, we talked about how third-party data can enrich and enhance analytics in many ways. There's lots of different types of data. We talked about location and geospatial data today, but that is by no means the limit to what type of data you can get. But with these third-party data sources, it's very important to do some pre-processing, especially with geospatial data, but with other types as well, to make the ETL and wrangling easier. You want to do a little work ahead of time so that the people who are providing the analytics have an easier time of doing those analytics. Data enrichment can augment both sides of a bimodal analytics architecture, so your enterprise reporting, your data warehouse, as well as your data wrangling and ad hoc reporting. But migrating the insights that you get from data wrangling into the warehouse or into your enterprise reporting architecture is very important to make sure that the wranglers stay focused on, finding the next new insight. So with that, we'll open up to Q&A. And while we're doing that, I'm just going to leave up this screen on upcoming sessions. So we've got one tomorrow on Cognos Analytics, and we've got some next week as well.
Jeff, we have had a couple of questions come in. This question is, how do I make sure that data wranglers aren't doing duplicative work?
Sure. So I think that, again, that speaks to the process that you put in place around your wrangling and why a tool that lets you manage that process is important. But the tool enables that. You need to, have some communication both between your data wranglers and also between them and your warehouse people to understand what's being done. Because sometimes you'll have, 3 wranglers doing the same thing. Sometimes you'll have a wrangler doing something that's already in the warehouse because they didn't know it's in the warehouse. And so, what's important is to have frequent communication to make sure that, people are aware of what insights are being generated. Often, there may be a new business driver for information that the data warehouse people don't know about. And so they don't see the need to update the warehouse because they don't understand how the business processes have changed. So it's really a question of making sure you have the right communication and process in place.
Interesting. So to some degree, that comes back to governance, which we're going to be talking about next week, I believe. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. An additional question here. I guess one of your diagrams, you have the sandbox. Could you elaborate on that? What is the sandbox?
Yeah, sure. So when you're data wrangling, you are changing data in some way. So you're joining sources together. Maybe you're calculating new fields. Maybe you're filtering out, things that you don't want to look at. You need a place to put that. And again, this is something that can get out of control if people, and you think about it from an Excel perspective, usually when people wrangle with Excel, you end up with 100 spreadsheets in a folder, and it's hard to know which ones are important. So a sandbox is a database like Snowflake or Redshift or anything like that, where the results of wrangling can be placed. And it makes sense to have it in the cloud because often that's wrangling needs can often be a little more dynamic. And so to have something that has that flexibility, the ability to clone data sets, the ability to sort of jump back if you made a mistake, it can be very valuable.
And we do have another question. It says, good question. How can I find out what types of third-party data are available? We've talked about
Precisely.
And it has 11,000 fields or something, but clearly there's other industry data available. How do I find that?
So yeah, and there's a very wide variety of places you can go. So there's if you're interested in some of the sync sort data you saw, they have a data marketplace. We can help you find the right types of data or the right way of delivering that data. Sometimes there's a data set you might want to get get a flat file every month as it's updated, or you want to have an API that you can call. We can work through those questions. But there are a number of other data marketplaces that exist. Snowflake has a data marketplace.
Precisely.
Has a data marketplace. Amazon has a data marketplace. So, and just more and more sources are being added every day. And some of those are, more intended as, there's a lot of free sort of here are sample data sources you can use if you want to run a model. But there's more and more that are, here's public access weather data, or here is, other data that is of value that, that we will sell to you. So those are the places that I would recommend starting. Obviously, the more focused you are in terms of what you're looking for, it's easier to sort of find the right places.
And then there's one more fairly technical question about one of your diagrams. It says, why does the bimodal diagram have the wrangler feeding into ETL?
Oh yeah, so yeah, that was Dean's slide where we were showing how data wrangling runs in parallel to traditional ETL, running your data warehouse, and so usually those two are going to be separate. The data wranglers are off doing sort of ad hoc quick analytics, but sometimes it happens that you end up with a little bit of a hybrid where there's some particularly important insight that the wrangling tool creates, and it needs to go into the warehouse, but for practical or technical or bandwidth reasons, it's going to take a little while to really sort of productionalize that. And so sometimes you will have wrangling output sort of more directly injected into the warehouse. You have to be careful with that because usually the whole point of wrangling is that it can change more quickly, and you don't want that to be a permanent situation. But as long as people are keeping track of it, it's a good way to sort of compromise and sort of quickly get something into the warehouse while you build out the more permanent solution.
All right, I think that's it for the questions that we had come in.
I want to thank everyone for attending and hope that we see you all again next week. And thank you very much.